It is the year 851. Less than half a century has passed since the death of Charlemagne, yet the empire he built already appears to be standing at the edge of collapse. The Treaty of Verdun divided the Carolingian Empire in 843, separating it into 3 kingdoms ruled by Charlemagne's grandsons. But the division did not bring peace. Instead, the new kingdoms lacked the soldiers, money, organization, and political unity needed to confront the dangers gathering around them. As we have already seen, many of the Carolingians' problems came from within. Since the days of Clovis, the Frankish tradition of dividing territory among royal heirs had repeatedly produced succession disputes. Brothers fought brothers, nephews challenged uncles, and ambitious aristocrats changed sides whenever doing so served their interests. Charlemagne's descendants were no exception. Their civil wars weakened royal authority, emptied treasuries, divided armies, and left entire regions exposed. The Northmen quickly recognized the opportunity. Scandinavian fleets sailed into the rivers of Western Europe, attacking Rouen, Nantes, Paris, and countless towns, monasteries, farms, and villages. But the Viking raids were only one part of a much larger transformation. The crisis of the 9th century produced 3 major consequences. First, the aristocracy of Western Francia began attempting to control the monarchy. Many nobles believed that if the king could no longer defend the kingdom, then they had the right to limit his authority, or even replace him. Second, Brittany moved steadily toward independence. Normandy, once an official of the Carolingian Empire, turned against his former rulers and established an autonomous Breton state. His son, Arispia, defeated the Franks and forced Charles the Bald to negotiate. Third, the Scandinavians began changing their objectives. They were no longer satisfied with brief coastal raids. They started establishing fortified bases, occupying strategic territories, controlling commercial routes, and eventually conquering land for permanent settlement. The Northmen were evolving from raiders into colonizers, and in the decades that followed, their actions would transform not only Francia, but also England, Eastern Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Byzantine world. Charles the Bald and the crisis of Western Francia at the beginning of the 850s, the Carolingian world entered a decisive period. In Eastern Francia, Middle Francia, and Western Francia, the grandsons of Charlemagne were gradually losing control of their kingdoms. Of the 3, Charles the Bald faced perhaps the most dangerous situation. His kingdom was threatened by Scandinavian raids, war with the Bretons, unrest in Aquitaine, and rebellion among his own aristocrats. The defeat of the Franks at the Battle of Ballon in 845 had already demonstrated the limits of Carolingian power in Brittany. Charles could not simply raise another army and expect obedience. Every military campaign depended on the support of counts, bishops, abbots, and powerful landowners. These men supplied soldiers, horses, food, weapons, and money. If they refused to cooperate, the king possessed few ways to force them. The monarchy that had once ruled much of Western Europe now struggled to defend even its own frontier regions. The long struggle between the Franks and the Bretons, relations between the Franks and the Bretons, had changed repeatedly over several centuries. At times, the two peoples traded, negotiated, and cooperated. At other times, they fought over borders, religious influence, and political control. By the 6th century, Frankish authority had become established around Vannes. From there, bishops and priests connected to Tours spread Christianity throughout the region. As the local population converted, commercial, religious, and political ties with the Frankish kingdoms became stronger. However, extending that influence across all of Brittany required resources that the Merovingian kings rarely possessed. Whenever the descendants of Clovis fought among themselves, the Bretons took advantage of the disorder. Like the Saxons and Slavs along other Frankish frontiers, they raided neighboring territories, resisted taxation, and rejected outside control. Vannes itself, eventually returned to the control of local Breton rulers. It was not until the reign of Pepin the Short in the 8th century that the region again came firmly within the Frankish sphere of influence. To contain Breton attacks, the Carolingians established the Breton March, a militarized frontier zone extending around Nantes, Rennes, and the approaches to the Cotentin Peninsula. Its purpose was to protect Frankish territory and prevent Breton expansion. From these fortified borderlands, Carolingian armies could also launch expeditions deeper into Brittany. Charlemagne generally favored military pressure. His son, Louis the Pious, attempted a more diplomatic strategy. Rather than governing every Breton territory directly, Louis appointed a trusted local leader named Nomanai to supervise Brittany on behalf of the empire. Nomanai received authority in the region of Vannes and became one of the most powerful representatives of Carolingian rule in Brittany. But when the sons of Louis the Pious entered into civil war, Nomanai began distancing himself from the dynasty. His behavior was not unusual. Across the empire, counts and local lords were taking advantage of the collapse of central authority to create personal domains. Nomanai did the same in Brittany. He transformed an imperial office into the foundation of an independent power. Local lords turn against the crown. The decline of royal authority could also be seen in Nantes. When Charles the Bald selected Renaud of Herboges to govern the region, another aristocrat, Lambert, considered himself the rightful candidate. Instead of accepting the king's decision, Lambert rebelled. With Breton assistance, he fought Renaud, defeated him, and eventually seized control of the county. But Lambert's victory came at a terrible cost. While the local aristocrats fought one another, Scandinavian forces attacked Nantes and devastated the surrounding territory. Lambert gained control of a county that had been weakened, depopulated, and stripped of much of its wealth. Nevertheless, Charles the Bald was too weak to remove him. The king eventually had little choice but to tolerate the authority of the man who had defied him. This was becoming a pattern throughout Western Francia. The king still issued orders, granted titles, and claimed supreme authority. But powerful local men increasingly decided for themselves whether those royal commands would be obeyed. Nomanai's rise in Brittany formed part of this broader collapse. By the time of his death, the Breton movement toward independence had become almost impossible to reverse. His son, Arispia, inherited the struggle. The Treaty of Angers, after defeating Charles the Bald at the Battle of Jingland in 851, Arispia negotiated from a position of strength. The result was the Treaty of Angers. Charles recognized Arispia as ruler of the Bretons and granted him control over important frontier territories, including Rennes, Nantes, and the Pays de Retz. In exchange, Arispia accepted a symbolic relationship of vassalage toward Charles. For Charles the Bald, the agreement preserved a small measure of dignity. He had lost territory, but he could claim that the victorious Breton ruler had become his vassal. Symbolically, the king remained superior. In reality, Arispia governed an increasingly independent kingdom. For the Breton ruler, the treaty was an excellent arrangement. He had enlarged his territory through war and protected it through diplomacy. By recognizing Charles as his nominal overlord, Arispia reduced the likelihood of an immediate Frankish reconquest. The agreement also opened the possibility of military cooperation against the Scandinavians. That possibility mattered because Viking activity was becoming more dangerous every year. From seasonal raids to permanent bases by the middle of the 9th century, Scandinavian attacks were changing in character. Earlier raiders had often arrived during the warmer months, pillaged vulnerable settlements, and returned north before winter. Now they began remaining for longer periods. They occupied islands, constructed fortified camps, gathered horses, and launched expeditions far inland. Near Rouen, on the island of Oisel in the Seine, Scandinavian forces created a strong defensive base. From there, They could organize attacks throughout the river valley. The camp functioned as a supply center, winter refuge, shipyard, prison, and military headquarters. Another base was established closer to Paris. From these positions, Viking groups captured horses and moved beyond the riverbanks. Their mobility allowed them to strike cities far from the coast. Meaux, Melun, Chartres, Évreux, Bayeux, and many other communities became vulnerable. The Carolingian garrisons were unable to respond effectively. Charles the Bald could not defend every city, monastery, river, and road simultaneously. Local populations were increasingly forced to protect themselves. A kingdom reduced to prayer. One medieval account describes an attack near Redon in Brittany. A Scandinavian force reportedly sailed up the Vilaine River and prepared to sack the town. No royal army arrived. No major garrison stood between the attackers and the inhabitants. The local priests gathered farmers, merchants, and families in front of the church. With no military solution available, the population prayed for deliverance. According to the story, a violent storm suddenly erupted as the Scandinavians approached. The raiders interpreted the event as a sign that the Christian God was protecting the town. They returned to their ships and withdrew. Whether the account describes a real event, a later legend, or religious propaganda cannot be known with certainty, but the story reveals something important about the period. Royal protection had become so unreliable that many communities believed prayer was their final defense. The central government that had once commanded armies from the Pyrenees to the Elbe was now absent from entire regions. The aristocracy turns against Charles under these conditions. Many Frankish aristocrats began questioning whether Charles the Bald deserved to remain king. At several assemblies during the 850s, he was accused of weakness, incompetence, and failure. His enemies argued that the kingdom required a stronger ruler. Charles had failed to prevent Viking raids. He had suffered defeats against the Bretons. He had struggled to control Aquitaine. He depended heavily on negotiations, payments, and compromises. To his critics, this was proof that he could no longer perform the most basic duty of kingship, protecting the realm. But replacing him created another problem. Who could take his place? Lodair I, ruler of Middle Francia and holder of the imperial title, had not performed much better. To reduce Scandinavian pressure, he had granted territory in Frisia to Danish leaders. Instead of ending the attacks, these arrangements sometimes gave Viking groups permanent bases from which they could launch further expeditions. Middle Francia also faced danger from the south. Mediterranean islands and coastal territories were threatened by Muslim raiders operating from North Africa and Iberia. Corsica suffered repeated attacks, and some inhabitants fled toward the Italian mainland and territories controlled by the papacy. Then, in 855, Emperor Lodair I died. His kingdom was divided among his three sons. Louis Roman II received Italy and the imperial title. Charles of Provence received Provence and the southern portion of the kingdom. Lodair Roman II received the long northern territory between eastern and western Francia. This region became known as Lotharingia, the kingdom of Lodair. Its name would survive in the German word Lothringen and the French name Lorraine. The division weakened the central Carolingian territories even further. None of Lodair's sons seemed capable of taking Charles the Bald's throne. The dissatisfied nobles of Western Francia therefore looked east. Louis the German invades Western Francia. The rebels invited Louis the German, king of Eastern Francia and half-brother of Charles the Bald, to become their ruler. Louis appeared to possess the qualities Charles lacked. He had defended his eastern frontier more successfully. He had maintained pressure on Slavic neighbors. He had also prevented Scandinavian attacks from destabilizing his kingdom to the same degree. Between 855 and 858, Louis attempted to take advantage of Charles's weakness. Forces loyal to him moved into Western Francia. One army entered Aquitaine, hoping to gain control of the southern kingdom. Another crossed the frontier and advanced into Charles's northern territories. At the same time, Viking forces continued their attacks. Paris was pillaged again. Orléans, Saintonge, and other regions suffered devastation. Even inland territories that once seemed protected by distance were no longer safe. Charles appeared to be losing his kingdom from every direction. His survival required a political maneuver powerful enough to divide his enemies and reassure the nobles who still feared another succession war. Charles uses the succession to save his throne. The history of the Frankish kingdoms had repeatedly been shaped by disputes over inheritance. When a king died, his sons often divided the realm among themselves. This tradition created rival courts, disputed borders, and generations of civil war. Charles the Bald, now, used the fear of another division to his advantage. He had several sons. His eldest surviving son, Louis the Stammerer, could be presented as the future heir to Western Francia. A younger son, Charles the Child, could be made king of Aquitaine. Because Charles the Child was still a minor, the Aquitanian aristocracy expected to exercise considerable influence over him. This arrangement gave the Aquitanians a degree of autonomy, while keeping the region within the Carolingian family. At the same time, Charles could promise the nobles of Western Francia a more stable succession. Instead of dividing the entire kingdom equally among all his sons, he could designate a principal heir. Other sons could be directed toward religious careers, preventing them from becoming rival kings. This was not simply a family decision. It was a political weapon. Charles offered the Western aristocracy something Louis, the German, could not guarantee: a clearer and potentially less destructive succession. Louis had several sons of his own: Charlemagne, Louis the Younger, and Charles the Fat. Their future inheritance remained uncertain and could easily produce another division. Charles's message was therefore simple. Replacing him with Louis might solve one crisis, but it could create an even more dangerous succession war later. Keeping Charles offered at least the possibility of stability. The strategy succeeded. Support for Louis, the German, weakened. Eastern Frankish forces withdrew. Charles remained king of Western Francia, while his young son received the crown of Aquitaine. The monarchy survived, but only barely. A brief political recovery, once the immediate civil war had been avoided. Western Francia appeared to enter a period of relative stabilization. Charles had preserved his throne. Aquitaine had been temporarily reorganized. The eastern invasion had failed. A diplomatic settlement had been reached with Brittany, but the underlying problems remained. The aristocracy was still powerful. The royal army was still dependent on local lords. The Scandinavians still possessed fortified bases, and the Breton alliance was far from permanent. Arispia was eventually assassinated. A new ruler, Charlemagne, took power in Brittany. Unlike Arispia, Charlemagne did not owe his position to the Treaty of Angers and did not feel bound by the same relationship with Charles. Under his rule, Brittany moved further away from Frankish influence. Breton armies again attacked neighboring territories and expanded their control. Western Francia, therefore, remained trapped between two enemies. To the west stood an increasingly independent Breton kingdom. Along the rivers and coastlines operated Scandinavian armies, whose expeditions were growing larger, longer, and more ambitious. The Vikings enter the Mediterranean by the 850s and 860s. Viking activity was no longer limited to the North Sea, the English Channel, or the rivers of Francia. Scandinavian fleets began reaching the Mediterranean. Some sailed around the Iberian Peninsula, attacking coastal cities in Christian and Muslim territories. They raided parts of Galicia and Portugal. Lisbon was threatened. Further south, fleets attacked cities connected to Muslim Al-Andalus. Seville suffered a major Viking assault in 844, prompting the Umayyad rulers of Cordoba to strengthen their fleet and coastal defenses. Later expeditions targeted areas near Cadiz, Algeciras, Malaga, and Almeria. Some raiders passed through the Strait of Gibraltar and entered the Mediterranean. They attacked islands and coastal settlements, seized prisoners, gathered treasure, and searched for defenseless ports. One famous expedition was associated with Bjorn Ironside and Haystein, although the surviving accounts blend history and legend. Their fleet moved along the Atlantic coast, entered the Mediterranean, and attacked regions in Iberia, North Africa, southern Francia, and Italy. The Scandinavians reportedly wintered near the Camargue before traveling up the Rhone Valley. They reached areas near Valence and raided deep into territories that had never expected an attack from the north. Even when local armies eventually stopped them, the raiders departed with enormous quantities of treasure and captives. The expedition demonstrated the extraordinary range of Scandinavian naval power. Men who had departed from the distant north could now threaten both Atlantic and Mediterranean societies. The attack on Constantinople at almost the same time, Scandinavian warriors operating in Eastern Europe reached the Byzantine Empire. These Eastern Scandinavians were often called Rus or Varangians. They traveled along the river systems, connecting the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. The routes were difficult. Ships had to be dragged over land between rivers. Travelers faced rapids, hostile tribes, toll collectors, and bandits, but the rewards were enormous. Constantinople was one of the richest cities in the world. Its markets connected Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia. In 860, a Rus fleet suddenly appeared near the Byzantine capital. The attack came at a dangerous moment. The emperor and much of the Byzantine military were campaigning elsewhere. The imperial fleet was not fully available to defend the city. The attackers lacked the siege equipment required to break through Constantinople's massive walls. They therefore devastated the suburbs, villages, monasteries, and coastal settlements around the Bosporus and the Sea of Marmara. The psychological shock was enormous. The capital of the Roman Empire had been threatened by warriors who had traveled from the Baltic through the river systems of Eastern Europe. The Byzantines had long understood the danger posed by Arab fleets in the Mediterranean. Now they also had to consider attacks arriving from the north. The rise of the Rus' Scandinavian influence in Eastern Europe was not limited to raiding. Varangian merchants and warriors established trading centers along major rivers and lakes. They strengthened settlements around places such as Novgorod and later Kiev. From these centers, they controlled portions of the commercial routes linking the Baltic to the Black Sea and the Caspian region. According to later tradition, the arrival of the Varangian ruler Rurik in the 9th century marked the beginning of a new political dynasty in the region. The precise details remain debated, but Scandinavian elites clearly played an important role in the early development of the Rus principalities. Kiev became especially important. Located along the Dnieper River, it stood at a crossroads between northern forests, steppe routes, Byzantine markets, and Slavic agricultural regions. The political network that developed around Kiev became known as Kievan Rus. Over time, the Scandinavian ruling groups mixed with local Slavic and Finnic populations. They adopted local languages, customs, and political traditions while maintaining important connections to Scandinavia and Byzantium. The result was not simply a Viking colony. It was the emergence of a new civilization. Kievan Rus would later influence the histories of Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and much of Eastern Europe. The Varangian Guard, the Byzantine rulers eventually discovered that Scandinavian warriors could be useful as well as dangerous. Varangians developed a reputation for physical strength, loyalty, and battlefield discipline. Because they were foreigners, they were often less involved in the political rivalries of Constantinople. This made them valuable to emperors who feared betrayal by local aristocrats or military commanders. By the late 10th century, Scandinavian and Rus warriors formed the famous Varangian Guard. This elite force served as the personal guard of the Byzantine emperor. Its members protected the imperial palace, accompanied rulers on campaign, and fought in some of the most important Byzantine wars. Later, many Anglo-Saxon warriors also joined the Guard, particularly after the Norman conquest of England in 1066. The Varangian Guard remained one of the most famous foreign military units in medieval history. Once again, Scandinavian expansion had produced an unexpected result. Men who had first threatened Constantinople eventually became defenders of its emperor. The Great Heathen Army, while some Scandinavians moved east and others entered the Mediterranean, Danish and Norwegian leaders increasingly focused on the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. According to later tradition, the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok gathered a massive army to avenge their father's death. Among the leaders associated with the campaign were Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan, and Ubba. The exact connection between these commanders and the legendary Ragnar remains uncertain, but the invasion itself was real. In 865, a large Scandinavian force landed in East Anglia. Unlike earlier raiding parties, this army did not arrive merely to seize treasure and leave. It came prepared to remain, conquer, and control territory. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were divided. Northumbria was weakened by internal conflict. Mercia and Wessex competed for influence. East Anglia stood exposed. Kent and other southern territories faced their own political pressures. The invaders exploited these divisions with remarkable effectiveness. The fall of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, the Great Heathen Army, first secured horses and supplies in East Anglia. It then moved north into Northumbria. The kingdom was already divided between rival rulers. The Scandinavians captured York and defeated attempts to remove them. Northumbria became one of the first major Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to fall under Viking control. The army then turned toward Mercia. Towns were occupied, rulers were pressured, and tribute was demanded. East Anglia was eventually conquered as well. Its king, Edmund, was defeated and killed. Later Christian tradition transformed him into Saint Edmund the Martyr. By the 870, only Wessex remained capable of offering sustained resistance. Even Wessex came close to collapse. The Scandinavians attacked repeatedly, forcing the West Saxons into years of exhausting warfare. Alfred the Great, the turning point, came under Alfred, King of Wessex. Alfred inherited a kingdom under enormous pressure. Viking armies had defeated or conquered most of the other Anglo-Saxon states. The invaders possessed experienced commanders, fortified bases, ships, horses, and access to reinforcements from across the North Sea. Alfred suffered serious defeats. At one point, he was forced to retreat into the marshes of Somerset. But he did not surrender. He gathered loyal supporters, reorganized his forces, and prepared a counterattack. In 878, Alfred defeated the Viking king Guthrum at the Battle of Edington. The victory did not remove the Scandinavians from England, but it prevented the destruction of Wessex. Guthrum accepted baptism and negotiated a settlement. A large part of England remained under Scandinavian influence and became known as the Danelaw. Wessex controlled much of the south and west. The island was now divided between two political systems. Alfred understood that one victory would not be enough. To survive, Wessex needed deeper reforms. He reorganized the military system so that part of the army could remain in service, while others returned home to maintain farms and local economies. This created a more sustainable defensive force. He also constructed a network of fortified towns known as burhs. These strongpoints protected roads, markets, river crossings, and population centers. No community within the kingdom was supposed to stand too far from a fortified refuge. Alfred also encouraged the construction of ships to challenge Viking movement along the coast and rivers. But his reforms were not only military. He promoted education, literacy, religion, and law. Inspired partly by Charlemagne's earlier cultural reforms, Alfred invited scholars to his court, and supported the translation of important Latin works into Old English. He believed that a kingdom could not survive through weapons alone. It also required knowledge, administration, faith, and a shared political identity. The beginning of England, Alfred presented himself not merely as King of Wessex, but as the protector of all English people who were not under Danish rule. This was a major political development. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had long possessed related languages and cultures, but they had rarely acted as one nation. The Viking invasions forced them to reconsider their divisions. Survival required cooperation. Under Alfred and his successors, Wessex became the center of a movement to reconquer the Danelaw and unite the Anglo-Saxon territories. The process continued under Edward the Elder, Ethelfled of Mercia, and later King Ethelstan. In the 10th century, the major Anglo-Saxon territories were brought under a single monarchy. The Kingdom of England emerged. The Vikings had not intended to create a unified English state, but by destroying weaker kingdoms and creating a common enemy, they accelerated the political unification of the island. The Vikings, as unintentional nation builders across Europe, the same pattern appeared again and again. In Eastern Europe, Scandinavian traders and warriors contributed to the formation of Kievan Rus. In England, Viking conquest helped push the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms toward unification. In Francia, raids weakened the Carolingian monarchy and increased the power of regional aristocrats. In Normandy, later Scandinavian settlers would create one of medieval Europe's most dynamic principalities. In Ireland, Viking ports such as Dublin developed into major commercial centers. In the North Atlantic, Norse settlers reached Iceland, Greenland, and eventually North America. The Vikings were not following a single plan to build modern nations. Their leaders pursued wealth, land, power, trade, and personal glory, yet their actions transformed the political map. They destroyed old institutions, redirected trade, founded new cities, mixed with local populations, and forced neighboring societies to reorganize. In doing so, they helped shape the Europe that followed. Western Francia moves away from Charlemagne's empire in Western Francia. The Viking threat accelerated the decline of Carolingian authority. The king could not protect every region. Local counts and lords therefore built fortifications, raised troops, and organized their own defenses. Communities increasingly depended on nearby aristocrats rather than distant kings. Those aristocrats gained land, prestige, followers, and military power. Their offices became hereditary. Their territories began functioning like independent principalities. The kingdom did not disappear, but its political structure changed. Royal power became one force among many. The king remained symbolically important, yet his ability to command the entire realm was severely limited. Western Francia gradually moved away from the universal imperial ambitions of Charlemagne. It began developing into a smaller, more distinct kingdom. That kingdom would eventually become France, but one final transformation was still required. The rise of the Robertines for the Carolingians to lose the throne. A rival family needed enough wealth, military prestige, and political support to challenge them. That family would be the Robertines. The Robertines rose to prominence by defending Western Francia against the Vikings. One of their most important early leaders was Robert the Strong. He commanded territories in Western Francia and organized resistance against both Scandinavian raiders and Breton expansion. Unlike distant rulers who appeared unable to protect local communities, Robert gained a reputation as a warrior capable of confronting immediate threats. His military success strengthened his family. His descendants accumulated lands, offices, alliances, and royal connections. Several Robertines would eventually become kings. Their rivalry with the Carolingians would shape the politics of Western Francia for more than a century. Finally, in 987, Hugh Capet would be elected king. His accession marked the beginning of the Capetian dynasty. The Carolingian age would effectively come to an end. The end of the Carolingian world, the collapse of Charlemagne's empire, was not caused by a single battle, ruler, or invasion. It resulted from many pressures acting together. Succession traditions repeatedly divided the empire. Civil wars weakened the dynasty. Aristocrats turned public offices into hereditary power bases. Regional leaders sought independence. Scandinavian raids devastated the economy and exposed the weakness of royal protection. External enemies attacked from the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and the eastern frontiers. Kings responded with payments, treaties, land grants, and temporary compromises. Each solution created new problems. By the middle of the 9th century, the empire still existed in titles, ceremonies, and family claims. But the political reality had changed. Charlemagne's unified Christian empire was disappearing. In its place arose France, Germany, Burgundy, Italy, Brittany, the Danelaw, Kievan Rus, and a growing network of regional powers. The Vikings did not create this transformation alone, but they accelerated it. By attacking Europe's weakest points, they exposed the failure of the old order. By settling and trading, they connected distant regions. By conquering, they forced kingdoms to unify or collapse. By serving as mercenaries, they entered the armies of the civilizations they had once attacked. The Scandinavian expansion of the 9th century therefore represented far more than an age of raids and destruction. It was one of the forces that brought the Carolingian world to an end and helped shape medieval Europe. The empire of Charlemagne was fading. New kingdoms were rising. New dynasties were preparing to take power. And in Western Francia, the struggle between the Carolingians and the Robertines was about to determine who would rule the future kingdom of France.